It is back, perhaps one of the most interesting lawsuits that we've seen in a while, especially in gaming. This is to do with Myth of Empires, a recent open-world MMORPG, taking players into clans, building up their own parties, and of course, building massive castles, having NPCs farm for them, and then heading off to war. If you haven't seen it already, I made a first video talking about exactly what this is about a few weeks ago, but essentially, Myth of Empires has recently been removed on Steam. You can no longer buy it, because Studio Wildcard and Snail Games, who were involved with Ark Survival Evolved, accused them of stealing some of the source code. But it's about to get more interesting, because now we have seen the actual lawsuit. Angular Games, who made Myth of Empires, gave an update to what's happening with their game since it was taken off Steam. They have filed a lawsuit against Studio Wildcard and Snail Games USA, who made the false statements, according to Angular Games, that the game was being copied. This led to Steam delisting Myth of Empires. Of course, that's going to greatly affect their business, which is why this lawsuit was filed. They said they're seeking a preliminary injunction to have Myth of Empires restored to the Steam store as soon as possible. The case is scheduled for hearing on January 31st, 2022. They also stated that they're going to continue and develop Myth of Empires, and the current servers for the Steam version will continue to operate as usual. Of course, as I mentioned in the last video, if you already have the game Myth of Empires, you can still play it. It's not been taken down entirely, it's just been taken off Steam. They also said they'll continue their work opening new servers as well as developing new events. In addition, we can tell you that we're actively working on bringing the game online, both on our official website and on our game platforms. Players can continue to experience the world of Myth of Empires with their friends. Thank you for all the support. That was a statement that Angular Games brought out, but I think it's actually time to have a look at this lawsuit and what's going on. Okay, so here we are on the lawsuit. This was the PDF we were given that Angular Games released. Of course, the ones making the lawsuit are Angular Games, who are the developer of Myth of Empires, stating that Myth of Empires is the end result of a year-long development back in 2018, so and so. It's on Unreal Engine 4, all that sort of good stuff. But this is when it goes on to talk about exactly what happened. On December the 1st, 2021, the defendants transmitted to Valve a copy of the letter to annex hereto as Exhibit 1. Basically what this means, the defendants, who are Studio Wildcard or Snail Games, who make Ark Survival Evolved, they sent a letter to Valve to annex the game. In other words, take Myth of Empires off Steam, saying that Myth of Empires was built by stealing the Ark Survival Evolved source code and using stolen source code of the gameplay foundation for Myth of Empires. Of course, Angular Games saying these are false. But let's look at actually what we're seeing here. So let's look at Exhibit 1. So of course, Studio Wildcard first published Ark Survival Evolved on the June 2nd, 2015 for Steam. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Of course, as I mentioned, the main thing is Ark Survival Evolved have said that Myth of Empires has stolen their source code. And what's their reasoning? Well, the source code for Ark Survival Evolved here was also subject to reasonable measures to maintain its secrecy, including through employment contracts that prohibited Studio Wildcard's employees from using the code for any other purpose than assigned work and from disclosing the code to third parties. So supposedly saying that contracts for Studio Wildcard's employees, when they're making Ark Survival Evolved and Atlas and whatever, they have it in their contract that they can't use that code for any other games or purpose. But in 2020, at least one employee of Studio Wildcard's parent company, Snail Games China, who previously had access to this source code for Ark Survival Evolved, left, and they formed Angular Games, who is the developer of Myth of Empires. This is when Studio Wildcard became understandably concerned because of the large-scale similarities between Ark Survival Evolved and Myth of Empires themselves. The similarity extended to features that could be not explained through independent development, such as the use of identical gameplay mechanics not found in other games. Of course, in this general video, I don't really want to come out on either side of this argument. I'm kind of just trying to explain the whole thing because there is a lot to read. But this is when the lawsuit gets very, very interesting because, of course, we need to see actually what Studio Wildcard are talking about. What bits were stolen? Do they have any sort of proof or concern for this? And Exhibit A tries to show us this. The first look and analysis of Exhibit A says that Studio Wildcard's concerns are probably well-founded, saying that Myth of Empires, of course, used and copied their source code, because this analysis reveals hundreds of matching class variables and function names. What do they mean by this? Well, if we scroll down, we can see it all. We can see the variables here. On the left, we have Atlas. Atlas, of course, is made by Studio Wildcard and Snail World Games. It's pretty much a massive scale Caribbean pirate version of Ark, made by the same people, and I'm assumingly made on pretty much all the same engines and things like that. But that's what we have on the left. On the right, we have Myth of Empires, a completely separate company, completely separate game. However, one of the main people that started Angular Games, who made Myth of Empires, used to work for the same company and had source code to Ark Survival Evolved here. And these red lines show the exact matches. But I don't know that much about code. So I'm going to hand you over to my friend James, who knows what he's talking about. So can explain in a better way than I can whether this is just a coincidence or normal coding practice that we're going to see anyway.
So they're claiming that they've copied code and they're using the variable names as a proof of that, which, individual variable names you can't use. It's people can name variables the same thing if they're doing similar things to another game. That's not right. You can't get angry about that. But what they're showing is that pretty much every variable is almost exactly the same.
The variables are the second column, not in pink, right? So starting with previous
the pink
structure.
is the type of the variable.
Okay.
So it's the type of data that's stored in that variable, and then all the names next to them are the variable names, and they're all, as you can see, they've put the arrows pointing across to each name and where they link between the two, and they're all very, very similar.
I mean, there isn't, on this, at least the first screenshot, there isn't a single difference, I don't think.
Well, some of the ones on the right have had, one or two words changed. Right, but they're all in the same sort of structure. They're all in the same place. Now, I don't know if they've been ordered to look as though they've been.
Does it matter the ordering of it? Like, would it change how the coding works if it's in a different order?
No. It's just in terms of, obviously, if it was just a big list of variables like this, you could see that they'd been copied across because they're, you've got things like they're in the exact same place. They're all, the sort of same sort of thing. But these look like they've just been put in a file to be in the correct order, as opposed to actually being in that order anyway. But it is mostly the fact that they've found so many variables that are so similar.
I mean, I'm just scrolling down here to the other screenshots and it's all just red arrows.
Yeah, but at the same time, there is the element of, if you are creating a similar game, and when you're designing it, you may look at that game for reference and think, well, what they do is they built it like this, so we could do a similar thing, and you would end up with probably similar names for variables, because a good naming convention for variables is to name them what they do. And so if everyone's naming them what they do and they do similar things, they're going to have similar names.
I think that's probably that's the main argument that Myth of Empires are just putting forward. Yeah. But the problem is when you have someone that was high up at Snail World Interactive or whatever they're called, who make Ark and Atlas, that then went to Angular Games, who made Myth of Empires, it becomes less of a coincidence that they're all the same.
Yeah, it is. It's a little bit too similar, especially in that scenario, that it's just a coincidence, because as I said, it's almost everything is practically the same.
Would you say it's a common enough thing though that it doesn't outright prove that it's copied? It's just a bit suspicious.
It's very suspicious, but ultimately, if you were creating a game that is essentially a copy of another game, as in you were just doing it by looking at the game and making it yourself, which people do make games like that, you could end up with similarities such as this. The quantity of similarities, it does make it more suspicious. I can see the argument that it's just it's a similar game and we've done correct naming convention for our variables, so they have similar names. There's also this is just sort of a preliminary thing. They want to get access to the actual code. So I imagine this is their sort of initial, this looks way too similar. Please, can it be looked into to see how similar these games are from a structure point of view? Because fundamentally, variable names mean practically nothing. It doesn't matter what variables you have or what you name them. It's what you do with them that makes the game. And so they're trying to prove that actually there may be something here that they're they've made the game the same way. So can we look, because these
so
variables
really the
are
main
suggesting...
point is Atlas or Ark are trying to prove that they've nicked the code, but they can't obviously.
Yeah, they don't have access to the full code.
This is their example where they might have copied this, so they could have copied something else as well. Is that what
they're basically saying? If all these variables are the same, you know, what they could have copied our entire code. And obviously, if someone's moved across from that company, they will have a certain way of coding that will be very similar, obviously, because they worked in that company.
Very true. They might have done a lot of the stuff that was on Ark, and then they just this is how I code.
On that project, so they've been taught, you know, because they have to work in a team. They've all been taught to work a certain way, and they won't just drop that from changing companies.
So it's an interesting one. There are some coincidences here that seem kind of concerning, and I guess some people can probably understand where Ark Survival Evolved are coming from. Could it just be a coincidence? Could it be some of the reasons that James stated, that, you know, there is just a general way to code sometimes, and there will be, because they are kind of similar games, a lot of similarities between them? I guess we're going to find very, very soon, because this will be in the next 16 days when this hearing goes to court, and I'm really looking forward to see how this turns out, because I think this is a very, very interesting one with two games that I am very familiar with and have played a decent amount of. So make sure you stick around the channel if you want more follow-ups on this lawsuit. Are Angler Games in the right? Have they used completely original stuff in Myth of Empires? Or is Ark Survival Evolved actually onto something here? Is there some things that are just too coincidental to actually be coincidences? I guess we're going to find out in the future. But leave a like on the video if you enjoyed it. Leave a dislike if you didn't. Yet until then, I will see you in the next one.